Hi, everybody, and welcome back to World History. So we're doing sections 2 and 3 today. So let's go ahead and get started. So some terms and people for section 2 we need to learn about. Factions or groups of people. The Marquis de Lafayette we've talked about previously. Olympe de Gouges was a journalist that we'll talk about later on. Marie Antoinette was Louis XVI's wife. Émigrés, these are people who flee his or her country for political reasons. The sans-culottes, working class men and women who made the French Revolution more radical. The Republic, or a system of government in which officials are chosen by the people. The Jacobins, essentially a revolutionary political club made during the Revolution. So our central question for section 2. What political and social reforms did the National Assembly institute in the first stage of the Revolution? Well, they voted to end their own privileges after storming the Bastille, and from providing equal rights to all male citizens before the law, to the abolishment of their exclusion from taxes, the National Assembly aimed to change an unjust system. So, historians have divided the French Revolution into 4 different phases: the National Assembly, the Reign of Terror, the Directory, and the Age of Napoleon. The Directory and Age of Napoleon we'll talk about in section 4. The Reign of Terror we'll talk about later on today. The National Assembly, the biggest thing to keep in mind with this portion of the revolution is France became a constitutional monarchy. So the political crisis of 1789 coincided with the worst famine in history for France. Rumors were rampant and created panic, and during this period known as the Great Fear, peasants believed that the government troops were seizing their crops for the elites. Believing that nobles were trying to reinstate medieval dues, peasants stole the grain and set fire to old manor records. Although the violence did die down, peasant anger against the ancient regime remained high. Now, in Paris, there were several factions that competed for power. You have the National Guard, which was more moderate, led by the Marquis de Lafayette, and mainly a middle-class militia. Then you have the Paris Commune, the very radical group. They replaced the royalist government of Paris, and they mobilized violent action for the revolution, believing it was the only way necessary for change to begin. So the National Assembly reacted to the uprisings and voted to end the privileges of the nobility. Nobles gave up manorial dues and exclusive hunting rights. Nobles ended their special legal status and their exemptions from paying taxes. And the Assembly enacted the equality of all male citizens before the law, meaning they were all equal regardless of their socioeconomic status. By the end of August of that same year, the National Assembly had issued the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And it was modeled after the Declaration of Independence, and it announced free and equal rights for all men, natural rights, equality, freedom of religion for all citizens, and taxes levied fairly for all citizens. But these other 3 up here were only directed at men, not women. So the Declaration of Rights of Man did not please everybody. Women such as Olympe de Gouges called for equal citizenship for women. Louis XVI did not want to accept the reforms of the National Assembly, so that made things worse. So as a result, in October of 1789, some 6,000 women marched on the Palace of Versailles. They were angry about the famine and resented Queen Marie Antoinette, who lived a life of luxury. You know, the ladies that said, let them eat cake. They demanded to see the king. And the women brought the king and queen to Paris, where they lived as virtual prisoners. So the National Assembly also placed the church under state control, and it dissolved convents and monasteries, ended papal authority for the French church, and the civil constitution of the clergy made bishops and priests elected salaried officials, meaning they were subject to taxes. The move was condemned by the Pope. Many bishops and priests and a large number of French peasants did not agree with this. So in 1791, so we're jumping ahead a little bit, the Assembly produced the Constitution. This set up a limited monarchy. This allowed the new Legislative Assembly the power to make laws, collect taxes, decide on issues of war and peace. And moderate reformers considered that the Constitution of 1791 completed the French Revolution. Mind you, the revolution is going to continue for about another 4 or 5 years. And at that time, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette attempted to escape France. To many, this attempt meant that Louis was a traitor to the revolution. The Emperor of Austria and the King of Prussia signed the Declaration of Pillnitz, supporting Louis and threatening to intervene. As French immigrants spread fear of revolution in other nations, France prepared for war. The sans-culottes and the Jacobins pushed the revolution to a more radical action. The sans-culottes demanded a republic and an end to the monarchy, and the Jacobins gained the upper hand in the Legislative Assembly and declared war on Austria, Prussia, and Britain and other states. Fighting began in 1792 and lasted on and off until 1815, which we'll see wrap up when we do Section 4 next class. So moving on to Section 3, some more terms and people we have to talk about. Suffrage is the right to vote. Maximilien Robespierre, he was the chief architect of the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror itself lasted just under a year, from September of 1793 to July of 1794. We also have the guillotine, a bladed execution device used during the Revolution. We are going to introduce Napoleon today, and we're going to talk about the idea of nationalism and the city of Marseille, a port city in France. So the essential question of Section 3, what events occurred during the radical phase of the Revolution? Well, initially, the monarchy was abolished and a republic was established. War continued throughout Europe. After the radicals gained control, those who were against the revolution were subject to arrest or execution. Thousands, including the king and queen, were beheaded at the guillotine. In 1792, the war abroad was going badly for France. Many revolutionaries believed that the king was in league with foreign powers to retain his power. Citizens attacked the palace where the king was held. The king and his family escaped to the Legislative Assembly. The citizens also attacked prisons that held nobles and priests. Tensions led to increasing violence. Radicals took control of the assembly and called for the election of a new legislative body, the National Convention, which extended suffrage to all male citizens and seized all noble lands. In addition, the monarchy was abolished in favor of the creation of a republic. Now, the convention put Louis XVI on trial as a traitor to France. He was sentenced to death, and in January of 1793, he was beheaded. In October of that same year, his wife, Marie Antoinette, was also beheaded. By 1793, France faced external and internal threats from the Netherlands, Spain, Britain, and Prussia. Royalists and priests led rebellions against the government. The sans-culottes demanded relief from food shortages and inflations, and the convention was divided between the Jacobins and the Girondins. The convention created the Committee of Public Safety to deal with these issues. Now, the convention granted the committee absolute power to save the revolution. At war, the French armies overran the Netherlands and invaded Italy. At home, France battled the counter-revolutionaries through the use of terror. Now, Maximilien Robespierre was the leader. Ooh, I hit the wrong button. What button did I press? There we go. He was a reformer, but also supported terror as a way to maintain order. Promoted religious tolerance, tried to abolish slavery, and arrested and tried all those who threatened the revolution. Nearly 300,000 people were arrested, and 17,000 were executed by the guillotine for opposing the revolution. The Reign of Terror continued until Robespierre himself was executed in 1794. In reaction to the Reign of Terror, moderates produced the Constitution of 1795. The Constitution created a 5-man directory and a 2-house legislature. The directory made peace with Prussia and Spain, but continued the war with Austria and Great Britain, and it created a constitutional monarchy. It's important to note, though, the directory was extremely corrupt and did not solve problems such as rising bread prices. They appointed a Napoleon Bonaparte, a popular military hero, to rule France. By 1799, so a few years later, France had changed dramatically from the country of Louis XVI and his court. The term citizen applied to all people of all social classes. Elaborate fashions gave way to simple clothing. Nationalism, or love for one's country, rose throughout France. Troops in Marseille marched to a rousing song that would later become the French national anthem. State schools replaced religious ones, and social systems were organized to help the poor, old soldiers, and war widows. So that is it for notes for today. So your assignment is a shag packet on the Reign of Terror. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.